Broadcasting from Salisbury University campus, this is WSDL Ocean City, NPR News Talk 90.7, putting Delmarva first. Stay tuned for Delmarva Today with your host, Don Rush.
Thousands flocked to the National Folk Festival, but in the aftermath, a fight broke out, with the Maryland Comptroller's Office suggesting that the Wicomico County Executive tried to undermine the event over the licensing of alcohol. Welcome to Delmarva Today. This is Don Rush. Began with a letter to the Senate President Mike Miller from the County Executive Bob Culver, who claimed that the decision by the Office of Comptroller Peter Francho to provide an alcohol license for the festival was illegal. Comptroller's Chief of Staff Lynn Foxwell fired back, suggesting that Culver tried to undermine the festival. Now the city of Salisbury may consider asking for a creation of its own liquor board as it prepares for the third and final year of the national version of the event. All of this comes as the incumbent, Mayor Jake Day, has begun his re-election campaign with a challenge from Republican Wayne King. To talk about all of this, we have on our studio this morning Greg Bassett. He is the editor and general manager of the Salisbury Independent. Welcome to the program.
Hey, Don. How are you?
So, how does this begin here with this fight between the comptroller on the one hand and the county executive on the other?
It actually goes back to 2018. So what happened in 2018 when the Folk Festival was first announced and it was coming to town, it needed a beer and wine license. The Folk Festival organizers have learned through the years that what people like is to be able to buy a beer and then roam the entire footprint of the festival with a beer or wine in their hand. County Liquor Board, which is a state agency made up of local people appointed by the governor, were concerned about the idea of people roaming downtown Salisbury with beer and wine without it being controlled. What they would prefer are these little beer gardens where you've got little roped off areas where you buy your product, you stand within the roped area, and it's controlled. Either that, or they like the idea that they do at Beer and Wine Fest where they have a perimeter fence, you're carded on the way in, beer doesn't come in, beer doesn't go out. The other complication with this is if you have a beer and wine license at a restaurant or an establishment within that footprint, the people still can't leave leave the restaurant or the bar with a beer in their hand. So they start to leave and they're like, well, people are out on the street with beers in their hand. Why can't I take my beer out? Well, there's that pressure that goes on those establishments. Plus the idea if the person was to take it out, then the alcohol compliance people could fine them for letting liquor leave the premises, even though it's being circulated everywhere. So there were a lot of questions. So when the liquor board last year started, the license commissioner started asking these questions or making noises about it. The city got concerned that there might be some other sort of, not a corrupt thing going on in the back, but the idea that the county executive and a lot of the people in the county were not supportive of the city's folk festival. That they were going to drag their feet and there might be a chance that the license not be approved at the last minute. Mayor picks up the phone, calls the governor, and says, these people are messing with this thing. Tell me what to do. Governor apparently reaches out to Peter Francho, who's got the authority to say, no, this is what we're going to do. He can override the local concerns if he wants, but they're all on the same team. They're all state people, and he can issue these things. And his inspectors came down. They made some modifications to the plan, but they were determined to give the beer and wine license to the Folk Festival, and they approved it. This year, with the same scenario developing, the city and the Folk Festival people, instead of going to the local license commissioners, went directly to the comptroller because they'd done it last year, and they had it approved. And of course, the local people feel like there was an end run on their authority, and they were mad. I think they reached out to Culver, and Culver wrote the letter.
So we then understand why Culver wrote the letter, but he writes it to the president of the state Senate. Why is that, and how would you characterize the tone of Culver's letter?
Yeah, Culver's letter was pretty, indictful. Now you have to look at the situation up there in Annapolis where Peter Francho, the comptroller, and Thomas V. Mike Miller, the Senate president, are mortal enemies. They are total political enemies. Peter Francho got into office as a Democrat, and he doesn't bow in courtesy to Senator Miller, who's used to having other Democrats do that. Francho has sort of charted his own way, and he acts like he's buddies with the governor, who's a Republican. So there's a lot of concern about that. In fact, Senator Miller in the last session acted to strip Comptroller Francho of a lot of his alcoholic control powers, including the one that would allow the festival to be approved next year. So that's going to be a whole nother issue. So the idea, if you're going to plant a bomb or get someone, to cause trouble, you would get Miller involved in this situation. And I guess Miller didn't take the bait. The comptroller's office found out about the letter. They asked for a copy of the letter, and then they reacted.
So tell me a bit about Lynn Foxwell's letter. Not only is it straightforward, obviously, in the sense that it criticizes the local liquor board and Culver himself, but really sort of personally attacks Culver.
Right after all the poopy hit the fan, the county executive Culver actually had a great statement, I thought, about Mr. Foxwell, and that was, I wish I had people like him on my staff to be an attack dog for me, because Len Foxwell really ripped up Bob in a really bad way. Maybe overreacted a little bit, I'm not sure, but it was pretty, it was good reading, certainly, and he went after the county executive, called him all kinds of, not name-calling necessarily, but definitely questioned his intentions, and his competence, and his motives, and wrote a really long diatribe about this, which got everyone's attention.
Yeah, I mean, he talks about the idea that Culver was trying to undermine this, that he did this for personal resentment as opposed to the kinds of things that you're talking about. How did it get so personal? And was that appropriate? I mean, I don't know.
Well, you have a unique situation there in the county government building. We've got two really dynamic leaders who both want to be in charge. The mayor certainly is in charge of his city. Bob wants to be in charge of his county. The city's in charge. The city's in the county, so Bob feels like he's the big dog, and he wants people to come to him and ask permission. City doesn't want to go ask Dad for permission. They want to do things their own way, and that's fine. That's what a city is for. So you've got that sort of competing egos, I think, going on in the government office building. Mr. Culver wants to be included, but the idea and the sort of the analogy is the kids don't want to go ask the parents for permission. They want to do their own thing. Not that their own thing is bad at all, but you have to know from the beginning that Mr. Culver did not have the vision for the folk festival that the mayor and his people did. I didn't have the vision for the folk festival they did. I didn't think it was going to be the success that it is and the transformative thing that it has turned out to be. I was very cynical about this thing. And I think Mr. Culver kept that cynicism, and he's certainly surrounded by people who have that same kind of cynicism.
Do you think that Culver has hurt himself in some fashion? I mean, the reaction has been, I mean, was a delegate, Carl Anderton, said he was blown away by it. He didn't understand what was going on. Chamber of Commerce, the local Chamber of Commerce, made its own expression of disapproval, particularly after Culver had his press conference, I think earlier in the week, justifying it, what he did. I mean, is there some blowback for Culver, or how does this play out as we go ahead?
That's a good question. I don't know, but I think certainly there's questions about how he conducted himself, and if he wanted to raise this as a question, that probably wasn't the way to do it. And the way I asked him the question was, all right, when there was a problem with the alcohol license, why would you run and call Miller and complain to him? Why wouldn't you just say, look, pick up the phone and say, Jake, I want to help you get this liquor permit because this is a very important event. We support this event. Why weren't you like rah-rah festival? And he kind of diverted around that. He wanted the local control. He wanted a local, insight into what was going on. He's got a voice in his head. One of his, she says I shouldn't call her top aide, but A.K. Kenny is his PR person. Her desk is 30 feet from his desk. She happens to be chairman of the licensed commissioners. There's no conspiracy there. There's no scandal. It's just small town stuff. She's definitely an established person in government. She's well known in all the political circles. She's a great person, but certainly, she's able to say to him, "Wait a minute, what's going on here?" And he would probably want to react to that.
Do you get a sense, by the way, that the local liquor board, would have gotten around to finally approving this, or were these issues that you raised just obstacles that were insurmountable?
Well, that's what's frustrating for me as a reporter is the liquor board's input has not really gotten the airing that it needs because they didn't have a chance to really express that. It's stuff that's being sort of done in the background. But they are definitely concerned. They really did not like the idea of roaming alcohol throughout the town. Now, the mayor will say, and Mr. Culver agrees, that there were no incidents related to alcohol in either of the last two festivals. There were no incidents of violence or any kind of issues with alcohol. Mr. Culver says he's concerned about people bringing alcohol onto the premises, which is, that's a concern. But is the answer to that to have these little beer gardens or to let people roam free? The mayor also makes the point that Berlin had a festival in recent years in which they had the beer gardens it was a disaster because there was 500 people concentrated in one area and the rest of the area was empty. People want to be able to take their beer, walk around, and sample all the different things.
Do you think those issues are resolvable?
That's a good question. Now,
Right.
what could happen next is the comptroller today could approve the liquor license, the beer and wine license for next year's folk festival today. And that way, because his powers are going to, I think, either end on June 1st or January 1st. I need to verify this.
Right.
There might be a movement in the next version of the General Assembly to restore his powers. There's that aspect of it. But now, as you said, the city now, they're like, well, we'll just do our own thing. We're going to have our own liquor control board. We'll have our own inspectors. We'll make our own decisions. We'll issue our own permits. And that way we can have our folk festival without so-called county interference. So that's one of the remedies. And that's not unprecedented. The city of Annapolis has its own liquor board. There's been talk of, I think, City of Bowie might even have its own liquor board. But theirs is in reverse. Rather to have things more open, I think Bowie does it to be more closed. Ocean City for years has one of their own, but they've never been able to do it.
By the way, just before we leave this, the legal issue that Culver talks about in terms of not being legal to issue this this particular license, what kind of validity is there to that?
It's now, being a lawyer, it's vague to me. So
Yeah.
he's standing on the contention that this is a for-profit event, that this money, that beer and wine is being sold, and the money's going somewhere. It's not going to a designated charity. It's not going to the JCs, sort of the United Way, the kind of traditional things that we think of with a nonprofit. It's going to the National Folk Festival to sustain that. And the National Folk Festival has a parent organization. They make money on these things. They do, but they are a nonprofit with dedicated to the proposition they're going to promote folk festivals and folk life and folk entertainment to America. So they are designated as a nonprofit. He was trying to argue, I think, that they're not a nonprofit.
By the way, what's your sense about the National Folk Festival? I mean, you've already said that you were a bit cynical to begin with.
Yes.
I think everybody was a bit skeptical
Yeah.
in one fashion or another. How successful do you think it's been? What do you think about the numbers that we're hearing? And as we look ahead, we obviously have the last and final year of the national version, but then obviously we have to go ahead and have something like that in the outer years.
Yeah, I've had two very personal experiences with the Folk Festival in the last 2 years. The first year, last year, on the PRMC stage, which was on the site of the old Daily Times building where I worked my entire career, standing there watching the Quavy sisters, blown away by it, 3,000 people, looking at the hospital I was born in, and I was like, this city is not the same city. This city has changed. It's transformed. This is something that I'd never imagined could happen here. This year, I had the honor of introducing Bill Kirchen on that same stage. And Bill Kirchen was a guy that when I was a teenager, he played the Hot Rod Lincoln Telecaster, the guitar. And to be there and to face 3,000 people again and to be on that stage, for me personally was really amazing. And I must have gotten 100, 150 texts or phone calls. People saw me up there. Hey, you were up there. So people that I know and care about were out there, very involved in the festival. Certainly this year the attendance was amazing. I don't think the acts were as good. I didn't find as many musical acts that I enjoyed as much. But the camaraderie is great. The spirit of community is amazing. There were 80, 90,000 people there on Saturday. It was packed on Saturday. They ran out of food. They ran out of beer. It was an amazing event, and there's a lot of pride that goes into this. Someone said to me yesterday, he said, why can't Salisbury stand back and pat themselves on the back every now and then? Why do we have to be so negative about everything? It was a great event, and if there were 100,000 or 155,000, what's the difference? Is 55,000 more make it a success and 100,000 is a failure? I don't have any definition for that, but certainly the vibes are positive. The feedback's been positive. No incidents, which is just amazing. Very proud. You walk around in that and you're like, I'm proud to be from here.
So what do you see as we go forward once we lose that national dimension? Are we able to keep this up? And will it be similar? I mean, as a matter of fact, I was reading about, I think it was in North Carolina, the Greensboro event, where now obviously the national has moved on, but they seem to be having some great success.
Yeah, it's one of the things that once it gets started, it's hard to stop. There's one more year of the national event. No one's really said to me exactly what it's going to look like, if it's going to be like this, or if we'll get back to some of the more traditional stuff that's us. One of the things last year I enjoyed was the Skipjacks came up from Deal Island. They weren't there this year, so I was looking forward to that. But they want something new every year. They want you to diversify. They want you to be exposed to new stuff. So what we're going to do, I'm not sure. I hope it doesn't go back to like the old Salisbury Festival. I hope it's still something that's really innovative and challenges you. There were certainly acts this year where I started to watch it and I was like, yeah, this isn't me. Or I walked up, I'm like, this isn't me. I'm not going to enjoy this. But I would hang in there and I would get sucked in, and I would learn and I would expand my mind in terms of what was being presented to me, and I would understand. The woman from the Middle East who was dancing, I was like, I don't get this. And then just 5 minutes later, I couldn't look away. I mean,
Right.
it was an expressive thing that I had never even thought of. Last year, the Inuits doing the Inuit singing and talking in this language I had never heard. I was like, what is this? So it's an educational experience. It's really, I think, really helpful.
By the way, we previewed a number of the musical acts, and so I was able to hear bits and pieces, and some of it was certainly out of my bailiwick.
And the Quavy Sisters, actually their album's being released today,
right?
Their new album, and they're changing sort of the way they do things. But I've become their biggest fan. And I keep asking, are they going to come back? And the hope right now is to get them here, not next year, but the first year of our own festival. So that will make me a big supporter right there.
Do you think that the musical acts do you think those are the key then to making this festival what you hope it?
Yeah, I think so. And certainly because you need somebody that you're going to latch onto. So like this year, I looked forward to Bill Kirchen from the
Right.
Hot Rod Lincoln stuff. I couldn't wait to actually see him and be with him. But you also need good food. You need interesting food. I think this year I went to one of the vendors. I got a crab cake sandwich. It was one of the best crab cake sandwiches I ever had. I said, "Where are you guys from?" And they're like, "We're from Philadelphia." I was like, "How did you learn to make a crab cake this good?" It was delicious. I mean, it was just tremendous. So it was exciting to have that.
So, by the way, do you see this as a moneymaker then for the city?
Well, the city is a sponsor, so they
Right.
put up, I think, $40,000, or
Yeah.
what a lot of other groups do. They put up money, but then they provide employees to do a lot of work, so there's an expense that way. But certainly they released some numbers last week, and I don't have the numbers in front of me exactly, but it looked like a lot of business was created downtown. Last year there was some questions. People didn't know exactly how to sell things. Deli downstairs from my office, they were like, we couldn't sell anything. And my attitude was, there's 2,000 people 10 feet from your door. If you can't find a way to sell them food, I don't know what to tell you. Well, this year they found a way. They were busy all the time. So they learned from last year. I think they were more productive this year. And one of the great successes, you hear about Rody Joe's, having huge waits and it being packed for hours and hours. Sold a lot of pizza on the plaza, 600 pizzas or whatever I read. And then the new ice cream store downtown, they sold like 1,200 cups of ice cream on a day. So certainly there was a lot of attendance and a lot of business.
Turn to we have this mayoral election that's coming up. And I want to turn first of all to Jake Day. He had his kickoff event, which I was actually at, much smaller than the original one when he first announced that he was going to run. What do you make of his campaign and his record so far? I mean, he certainly has a vision for the city, if nothing else.
Yeah, as I've said to you before, he always seems to me to have the best ideas in the room. And I had someone recently say, have you seen the site planning for this town square? It's a disaster. And it's someone who actually competes with Jake. And I said, yeah, I have. It looks fine to me, but I don't know anything. Well, it's just terrible. And I said, well, what does your site plan look like? Oh, I don't have a site plan. So, when you have a situation like that, it's hard to be critical if you don't have a better idea, if you can't offer up your idea. And that's one of the things with Jake is that he always seems to have the best idea in the room. Either that or he's just terribly manipulative and we all get sucked into his ideas. I don't think it's that. But he certainly has opened my mind in terms of what the possibilities are downtown and erased a lot of my cynicism and kept a lot of energy going in terms of what we're able to do in Salisbury.
So, I mean, what kind of support does he have? I mean, he seems to be, in the sense I get and how he describes himself, he seems to be sort of this consensus builder. That I mean, he gets a lot of people in the room, and he may be herding, as it were, towards a particular goal or set of ideas. What sense do you get about his stewardship in terms of the process that he takes?
What's always impressed me and kind of annoyed me at the same time is he doesn't stay above it all. I mean, Barry Tillman's line used to be, when the dogs are out fighting, I'm going to stay on the porch. I'm not going to get in there and fight with the dogs. Jake will get off the porch and get down in there. He'll argue with people on Facebook. He'll try to explain things to his critics with the idea that, illumination is the answer. The whole, if you don't know what you don't know, you can't make decisions if you don't have information. And you hear all these conspiracy things. One of the things, I think Wayne King was saying Jake wants to build a high-rise in downtown Salisbury. That's private enterprise. It's not the mayor. The mayor supports it. I'm certainly skeptical about the success of something like that, but the mayor's not doing it. These are entrepreneurs that go to banks and borrow money,
Right.
and engage in capitalism and take a risk. The city's not doing that. So people think the city and the mayor are doing everything. They're not. But what he's doing is he's creating the opportunity, in theory, for businesses to do what they do. And that's really the key. As I tell my own kids with school, I can't take your test, I can't do stuff for you, but I can give you the opportunity to go to school. You've got to make the most of it. And I think that's what the mayor and the government are doing for businesses in the community, and I think that's essential.
If Jake does have another, say, 4 years or even beyond, what do you think downtown's going to look like?
Well, his point, I've always thought, downtown's kind of a lost cause, and why are we doing this? Or let's tear the buildings down and start again. And that's certainly not the solution at all. I've learned about this. That you've got to take the buildings that are there and you've got to build on your heritage. I remember supporting over on the west side when they tore down a lot of buildings. It was like, yeah, those buildings are bad. They should tear them down. And they tore a lot of them down. There was some outrage. But now you've got Chesapeake East. That building is beautiful. It was renovated. So there were other buildings like that there. They shouldn't have been torn down. Somehow their work should have gone into restoring those buildings. And that's certainly what's going on downtown. You've got Brett Davis from Davis Simpson. We've got a Progress edition that's coming out here actually next week. Amazing stories about what he's done to the city center, how they've completely renovated One Plaza East, which is the landmark building downtown. The idea of that high-rise that's going on Main Street, the Main Street master plan, all these things that were sort of undone for a long time. Give Mr. Culver a lot of credit. Got the courthouse fixed. The cupola on top of the courthouse was about to fall down. Like, how does this happen? How do we let things get in such disrepair? He fixed it, and you got to give him a lot of credit for that. So there's the focus on that. Now, Randy Day, the president of Purdue, CEO of Purdue Farms, who happens to be Jake's father.
Oh, that's right.
I was at a thing recently where he gave a very eloquent, I thought far more eloquent than even anything Jake has said, about the importance of the heart of downtown, that every successful city has a downtown core that you build from. So you fix that and you build out. What do we need to do with North Salisbury? The mall, the Sam's Club, the Walmart. There's nothing really for us to do up there, but we can focus some efforts on downtown. We can do some nutty things, the Waverly Drive bike path. Everyone's all excited about that. I ride my bike on that thing. It makes sense to me, But
do you see a lot of other people out riding bikes? I don't know.
But it doesn't make sense to my mom, for sure. To her, it's just a big inconvenience. So there's that whole paradigm thing. There's a youth thing. Not that I'm youthful, but there's like a transitioning world kind of thing. And it, again, is creating opportunity. It's there's an opportunity now to ride your bike from Pinehurst to your office downtown if you want, to the hospital. Not as a medical call, but if you work at the hospital.
Right.
So they're creating these opportunities, and I think just having that vision to do that is probably a good thing.
And a lot of, obviously, the emphasis has been on downtown. And I remember, as a matter of fact, when I entered Jake, when he made his announcement, the other portions of the town, like the Church Street area in particular, I drive through it now, and it looks a lot like it did when I did a story 4 or 5 years ago.
Right.
How do you see that playing out?
It's difficult. So that's a transitional housing area.
Yeah.
I have to say, Habitat for Humanity has done an amazing job. Salisbury Neighborhood Housing. There's new siding on those houses. The landlords, I think, have been more accountable. So I see improvements in those neighborhoods. It's better to me than it was 20 years ago, certainly, from what I see. Mm-hmm. I think the city inspectors do a pretty good job based on what I see in terms of enforcing, the code compliance. It stays up pretty good. That East Church Street mural, wow, that was another thing. They're going to paint what?
Right.
Where? What is this going to be? And you see the plans for it, and you're like, well, that's kind of cool. And then it gets done, and you're like, wow, this is really cool. So it's one of those things that it brings some pride thing in. It ties in the Chipman Center. Just recently, for my own edification and learning, I walked from the old train station to the courthouse, matching the route that was followed by Frederick Douglass when he visited Salisbury. I never would have thought to do that. I never would have taken the time to go over into that neighborhood. The mural made me do that, the concentration on that area. But yeah, is everything perfect in Church Street? No. Will it ever be? As long as it's transitional housing or introductory housing or whatever it is, it's going to be difficult. There's a lot of arguments about what the city can do in the other neighborhoods. I get a lot of talk about the Philadelphia, the Johnson Lake neighborhood there by the cemetery, what's going on there. But you see the mayor and these guys, they go out every month or a month and a half, and they do these neighborhood tours. They walk around. What's your problem? How's the code enforcement? What's going on with parking? Are your neighbors noisy? And they certainly engage the residents, and I got to say there's a lot of positive stuff in that. What they can do economically to help these people and these landlords, I'm not sure. I think I've learned that rentals are not necessarily the worst thing in the world anymore. We used to all want single-family housing, but society's changed so much. People don't want to invest in a down payment and a house and be stuck with a house. They want they don't want to have to deal with a yard. They want to be transient. They want the freedom to move fast. They're willing to pay a little bit more than a mortgage to do that. It's just a different way of thinking than what you and I were raised on.
Right. Maybe just one other thing about Jake before we move on to Wayne King, and that is, in the past we've seen lots of conflicts in terms of whether the business community supported or didn't support the mayor or some of the council people. We saw this issue obviously with the landlords and rentals and so on. What sense do you get about the city establishment in terms of Jake? And have a lot of those conflicts disappeared? Well, certainly not as visible as they used to be.
Yeah, I was raised in a scenario where there was always something dramatic happening, where the people who owned property in the city didn't live in the city, and they lost their non-residential voting rights, which was a big issue. Then you had a neighborhood person like Paul Martin, who was the mayor for a long time, was a very establishment, kind of a good old boy type, certainly support of all the business community, grew North Salisbury. His focus was to get the mall moved up there and to grow all that. And you could argue whether that was good or bad, but it's certainly the big economic matrix that supports Salisbury. So then you have Barry Tillman come in, neighborhood kind of person. Business people did not like her. The people who lived out of town who had businesses in Salisbury didn't like her because she wasn't focused as much on business, they thought. She was focused on the neighborhoods. That's what got her elected. Now I think we have a guy who seems to be aware of both. This mayor seems to understand business. He speaks at all the business things that I attend. He commands their attention. You see them nodding in the crowd. So I think they recognize that he's doing what he can to give them the opportunity to make money and to promote Salisbury so that all the boats rise. I see that, where he's not overly protective around them, at least, of the neighborhoods, that he understands the importance of commerce. I sound like I'm a Mayor Day commercial, and I don't mean to sound like that at all, because you need to be challenged. You need an election. You need issues to be argued and people to have better ideas and have a better way. I mean, there's no doubt about that. But I'm pretty impressed with what I see in terms of how the business people react to him.
Well, to turn to his challenger, Wayne King, he described himself as a 51-year-old Republican, and you obviously listened to the interview that we did. What's your sense about him as you began to explore his candidacy?
Well, basically all I know about him is from your interview.
There you go.
And I apologize for that, but we'll have Wayne on Pack 14, and certainly we'll get his coverage going on that issue, and I look forward to knowing more about him. So really all I know is from the interview. He certainly has some ideas, some points. I love the rally that he had down at the amphitheater. That was great. We covered that. He's got some concerns about crime. But I need to hear some more solutions. My frustration, and I was just talking to a police officer yesterday, frustrations with crime is that so much of crime is a social thing. It's someone gets insulted and they come back with a gun, or you're with my girlfriend and they show up with a gun. The rapes in this town, it's not a random rape where someone goes out and attacks an anonymous person. It's a social contract gone bad. What can the police do about that? I'm not sure. You can put a police car in front of every house, and is that going to solve those problems? I don't know. Drugs are an issue. Drugs are an issue everywhere. That doesn't excuse drugs, but I have to say that we're making great progress. And the fact is, if even though there's a perception that crime is high, The fact is, based on the numbers, and people say, oh, they're not reporting everything and whatever else. Based on everything I see, the uniform crime reports that are presented to the FBI every year, very sacred data. Crime is the lowest per capita that's ever been in the history of Salisbury. That's just a fact.
He says, I think in the interview, says that we have the highest crime rate in the state, or something to that effect, or very high crime rate.
I think he said third or second,
the
whole little Baltimore thing. But we've got a demographic that's like little Baltimore. So, I mean, there's that issue that goes on. And so much, the mayor's made this point. If the mall wasn't in the city, we'd have the best crime rate in America because of the shoplifting incidents at the mall and at the Walmarts. Those are in the city. It counts against the city numbers. Another police officer, a sheriff's deputy, said to me, if, these drug people, the people who have an addiction, they're breaking into cars in the city, in the county, doesn't matter where it is. These car break-ins all count against the numbers. So it's a reflection of the opioid problem, which the community is working very hard to solve. And even the sheriff has said you can't arrest your way out of this situation.
At the minute or so we have left, he seemed to be indicating, he said, as a matter of fact, that he questioned whether or not we should necessarily be in the business of trying to grow, that perhaps we need to scale down our vision. What's your sense about that? And I've heard that, actually, as you and I have covered politics, certainly me for the last 15 years or so here, that there's not necessarily an uncommon refrain amongst people who live in Salisbury.
It's the greatest conflict of my career as a reporter, dealing with people where people want growth and people don't want growth. Their neighborhood's been developed. They've moved here from somewhere else, but they don't want a neighborhood built next to them, a cul-de-sac built next to them. Right. I've got mine. You can't have yours. Is sort of the the analogy with that. Forever there were the farmers who couldn't wait to sell the farm so they could move to Florida. There's that aspect of it. But certainly within the city footprint, the city needs to grow. It needs to develop. It needs to replace the buildings that are there with new buildings, with new opportunities for people. That's what the zoning calls for. That's what a city is. And you designate areas for parks and zoo, and we've got all that great stuff, Pepperton Park out in the county. But there are areas that you designate for development, and you're supposed to develop them. That's what municipalities do.
I guess his argument is how in part how you do that. We've been speaking with Greg Bassett. He is the editor and general manager of the Salisbury Independent. Appreciate you stopping by and chatting with us.
Thanks, Don.
This has been Delmarva Today. I'm Don Rush. Thanks for listening.